At my son's wedding, a dream for 35 years, my heart shattered. He told me, "Ronnie said it'd be best if you just stayed in your lane." Me, a retired wedding planner, told I wasn't good enough. I just smiled, but something inside me snapped. This is my story of quiet defiance. Like, share, and let us know where you're listening from. For as long as I could remember, maybe even before Michael, my only son, was born, I dreamed of his wedding day. Not just any wedding, but his wedding. I pictured the moment he would stand at the altar, looking at his bride, his face full of love and promise. I imagined the dress, the flowers, the music, the laughter. Every detail, every feeling, was vivid in my mind. It was more than a mother's fantasy. It was a deeply personal vision, fueled by my own life's work. I spent 35 years dedicating myself to making other people's wedding dreams come true. But Michael's wedding was always the ultimate one, the culmination of everything I believed in about love and family. It was a day I expected to be filled with pure, unadulterated joy, a celebration of the beautiful life he was building. The news came on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sunlight streams through the windows, making lazy patterns on the rug. Michael, or Mike as everyone called him, sat across from me at the kitchen table, a nervous but happy energy humming around him. He looked directly into my eyes and said, "Mom, Veronica and I are getting married." Veronica, Ronnie as she preferred, was a sweet girl, a little reserved but seemed to make Mike happy. My heart swelled instantly. A rush of pure, immense joy washed over me, so strong it almost brought tears to my eyes. This was it. The moment I had dreamed of for decades. Hope bloomed bright and vibrant in my chest. I couldn't stop smiling. My son was getting married. Naturally, my immediate thought went to the planning. I had just retired. After 35 years as a professional wedding planner, I had orchestrated hundreds of weddings, from intimate garden ceremonies to grand ballroom affairs. My Rolodex, now updated to digital contacts, was legendary. I knew the best florists, the most reliable caterers, the most enchanting venues. My experience was invaluable, my passion unwavering. "Oh, Mike, darling, that's wonderful," I practically chirped, leaning forward, my eyes alight. "You know, with my experience, I'd absolutely love to help you and Ronnie plan everything. We could make it truly spectacular, just like you've always deserved." It wasn't just an offer. It was an eager, heartfelt plea, a desire to pour all my love and expertise into this momentous occasion for my son. But a strange hesitation flickered across Mike's face. His usual open expression tightened slightly, and he glanced away, then back. Well, Mom," he started, his voice a little softer than usual. "Ronnie actually has a pretty clear vision already. She's really into this modern minimalist look, you know? And she's been following this social media planner for ages. Someone named Eventology by L or something similar." My initial excitement began to falter, a tiny knot forming in my stomach. Modern minimalist? A social media planner? I tried to push down a feeling of unease. Of course, Ronnie would have ideas. Every bride did. But the way he said it, the slight shift in his posture, it signaled something wasn't quite right. Then came the words that struck me like a physical blow. Mike cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze completely now. He looked down at his hands, fiddling with a napkin on the table. When he finally looked up, his eyes were full of a hesitant, almost apologetic sadness. "Ronnie said it'd be best if you just stayed in your lane." "Mom?" The world seemed to tilt. My brain registered the words, but my heart refused to believe them. Stay in your lane. What did that even mean? For a moment, I just stared at him, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. A forced, too big smile stretched across my face, wide and unnatural. I repeated the phrase, "Stay in your lane?" My voice was high-pitched, almost a question, a desperate plea for him to clarify, to tell me it was a joke, a misunderstanding, something light-hearted. He didn't. He just sat there, uncomfortable, silently confirming the raw, blunt truth of the statement. The smile felt like a mask, hiding the sudden, sharp pain that had pierced through my joy. The immense joy that had filled me moments before evaporated instantly, replaced by an unfamiliar, crushing ache. It was a feeling of rejection, deep and personal, coming from the one person I least expected it from, my own son. After all these years, after every sacrifice, every late night, every moment of unwavering support, I was being told to step aside, to keep out, to stay in my lane. It wasn't just about planning a wedding. It was about being told my role, my experience, my very essence as a mother wanting to help, was not wanted. It was hurtful beyond words, a wound that opened in an instant and started to bleed. I think I need to just step away for a moment, I managed to stammer, pushing my chair back with a scrape that seemed deafening in the suddenly silent kitchen. I needed to be alone. I needed to breathe. I walked to my bedroom, closing the door behind me with a soft click, as if that small sound could shut out the hurtful words. I sat on the edge of my bed, the quiet room amplifying the echo of "Stay in your lane." Decades of dedication, of making magic happen, of pouring my heart into celebrations of love. All of it, in one dismissive sentence, now deemed obsolete, irrelevant, even unwelcome. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just Ronnie being assertive, wanting her own space. Maybe Mike was just trying to keep the peace. Maybe it was a generational thing, the old ways versus the new. I tried to tell myself it was a misunderstanding, a clumsy choice of words, but deep down, I knew better. The feeling in my gut was undeniable. Something had shifted. A crack had appeared in the foundation of what I thought was an unbreakable bond. It wasn't just about wedding plans. It was about respect, about my value, about my place in my son's new life. And then the most painful realization began to settle in my heart, heavy and cold. I sensed it, with a chilling certainty. I was becoming invisible. My son, my only son, was entering a new chapter, and I was being pushed to the sidelines, no longer seen as a vital part of his journey, but rather an outdated presence to be managed. The thought was excruciating. Weeks bled into months, each one marked by a growing distance. The initial shock from Mike's words, "Stay in your lane," began to settle into a dull ache, a constant companion. Conversations with Mike became strained. We talked about his work, about my garden, about the weather. Anything but the wedding. Ronnie never called me. Not once. No questions about my experience, no casual invitations to coffee, not even a polite check-in. It was a complete silence that spoke volumes, confirming my fears of becoming invisible. The only interactions I had with Ronnie were during family dinners at my house, always polite, always superficial. It was like living in a delicate bubble of forced pleasantries, where any real emotion or genuine attempt at connection was carefully avoided. One afternoon, Mike mentioned Ronnie was having a wedding vibes lunch with her mother, Evelyn, and a few close friends. It was meant to be a brainstorming session, a casual gathering to talk about ideas for the big day. My heart, against my better judgment, fluttered with a tiny spark of hope. This was my chance, I thought. My chance to show them I could be helpful, not intrusive. My chance to be included. I asked Mike if I could join, and he hesitantly agreed, saying he'd check with Ronnie. A day later, I received a short text from Ronnie. "Sure, come by if you want." It wasn't an enthusiastic invitation, but it was an invitation nonetheless. I carefully prepared, selecting my best outfit, and even brought along a folder of carefully curated inspiration boards, filled with elegant, timeless ideas that still felt fresh and modern. I had poured hours into them, updating classic concepts with contemporary touches, hoping to bridge the gap between my expertise and Ronnie's modern minimalist vision. The lunch was held at a trendy new bistro downtown. The air buzzed with lively chatter as I walked in. Ronnie, Evelyn, and 3 of Ronnie's friends were already there, surrounded by colorful mock-up invitations and fabric swatches. I sat down, feeling a familiar sense of awkwardness despite my best efforts to appear relaxed. After a while, summoning my courage, I carefully opened my folder. "Ronnie, I've been thinking about some ideas that blend classic elegance with a modern twist. I thought these might give you some inspiration, I said, my voice perhaps a little too eager. I laid out a board showcasing a sophisticated color palette, another with unique floral arrangements that were far from stuffy, and a third with innovative lighting concepts. Ronnie barely glanced at them. She waved a dismissive hand. Oh, those are very traditional, Ellie. A bit outdated for what we're going for, really. We're thinking more raw, industrial chic. Less of the classic wedding feel, you know? Her tone was polite, but her words were like a slap. Immediately, Ronnie's friends started giggling, exchanging knowing glances. Totally, Ronnie, one chimed in. That's exactly what my sister did for her second wedding. So over the top. Another added, yeah, all the best ideas are coming from TikTok now. Have you seen that Eventology by Elle Planner? She's from LA. Super cool. Everything is so fresh and unique. They went on, discussing social media trends, viral wedding videos, and the cool LA planner, as if I wasn't even there. Their youthful chatter made me feel like an ancient relic, my decades of hard-won experience reduced to quaint, irrelevant history. I felt a blush creep up my neck, a mix of embarrassment and indignation. Then, a quiet whisper cut through the general noise, sharp and clear enough for me to hear. Evelyn, Ronnie's mother, leaned close to Ronnie, her hand cupped around her mouth. I told you she'd bring something, Evelyn murmured, her eyes darting towards my now-ignored inspiration boards. She probably thought she'd take over. The words landed like tiny daggers, confirming my worst fears. They weren't just dismissing my ideas. They were dismissing me. They saw my help not as an offering of love and expertise, but as a power grab, an attempt to control. My jaw tightened. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. My 35 years of experience, the countless hours I had poured into mastering my craft, the reputation I had built, all of it was casually dismissed, reduced to an old woman's desperate attempt to assert herself. With a quiet, deliberate movement, I slowly and carefully folded my inspiration boards, tucking them back into their folder. The simple action felt like an admission of defeat, a silent surrender to their judgment. I stayed for the rest of the lunch, forcing a small smile, contributing nothing, feeling utterly deflated and utterly alone. Still, a part of me, stubborn and hopeful, refused to give up completely. A few days later, I gathered a list of my most trusted vendors, florists, photographers, caterers, people I had worked with for years, whose quality was guaranteed. I compiled it into a neat email, adding a polite note that said, "Just in case you need any recommendations, these are some truly wonderful people." I sent it to Ronnie, expecting at least a polite thank you, or perhaps even a question. I received nothing, just radio silence. Another email, another attempt to connect, met with another wall of quiet dismissal. It was a pattern, clear and deliberate. My next attempt was more personal. I found a small box of Mike's childhood keepsakes, a faded drawing he made in kindergarten, a tiny baseball glove, a few other sentimental items. I drove to his apartment, hoping to share a moment, to remind Ronnie of Mike's roots, and perhaps, by extension, my place in his life. When I rang the doorbell, Ronnie answered, looking surprised to see me. She stood framed in the doorway, blocking my entry. "Ellie, what a surprise," she said, her smile practiced and thin. "Just brought some of Mike's old things. Thought you two might enjoy looking through them." She took the box, peering inside. "Oh, how sweet. Thanks, Ellie." But she made no move to invite me inside, no offer of a cup of coffee, no casual chat, just practiced politeness, a clear barrier. I left feeling more empty than when I arrived. A few days later, Mike mentioned they were still looking for venues. I decided to suggest one of my absolute favorites, the Elmwood Estate. It was an exquisite, historical property, renowned for its elegant gardens and timeless ballroom. I described it to Mike, knowing it had hosted many truly beautiful weddings. He must have passed the suggestion on to Ronnie. Her response, delivered through Mike, was particularly sharp. "Ronnie said the Elmwood Estate is a bit dated." "Mom," he relayed, his voice apologetic. She called it a mom and dad wedding kind of place. Mom and dad wedding. The phrase hit me harder than any of the others. It wasn't just my taste she was rejecting, but my entire generation, my entire life. It was a blatant put-down, designed to draw a line between their new, modern world and my old, irrelevant one. In that moment, something inside me hardened. The constant ache of rejection started to morph into a different feeling, a mix of coldness and a growing, quiet fury. The tears I once held back now felt frozen. The urge to help had completely vanished, replaced by a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. The hardening within me grew stronger, but a lingering flicker of hope, or perhaps just maternal instinct, compelled me to try one more time. I invited Mike and Ronnie over for dinner, hoping a relaxed, intimate setting might break through the unspoken tension. I cooked Mike's childhood favorite, a succulent pot roast, slow cooked to perfection, filling the house with a rich, comforting aroma. I set the dining table with my best china, crystal glasses, and a simple vase of fresh flowers, creating an atmosphere of warmth and welcome. I genuinely wanted them to feel loved, cherished, and connected to our family home. The moment Ronnie walked through the door, however, any hope I had began to deflate. She wrinkled her nose, her eyes scanning the room. "Oh, wow," she said, her voice laced with a barely concealed distaste. "It's like very intense in here. The smell, I mean. And I don't really eat red meat, Eleanor." My carefully prepared meal, a labor of love, was dismissed with a casual wave of her hand. Mike, as usual, offered a quick, apologetic glance, but said nothing to defend me or my cooking. Dinner was stiff, a strained affair punctuated by forced smiles and polite but empty conversation. I tried to steer the conversation towards the wedding, hoping to find an opening, a topic where I might offer some useful, non-intrusive advice. "How are the plans coming along, Ronnie?" I asked, trying to sound genuinely interested. Her answers were short, vague, and unhelpful. "Oh, it's all moving along. Lots to do. The planner is handling most of it. We're just figuring out the small details." Each reply was a polite but firm wall, keeping me out. Towards the end of the meal, I made one last attempt. I remember a wonderful seamstress, Mrs. Petrov. She's a true artisan, can create the most exquisite custom gowns. Her work is simply breathtaking. I genuinely thought I was offering a valuable resource, someone who could craft Ronnie's dream dress perfectly, something truly unique. Ronnie put down her fork, her eyes narrowing slightly. Her voice, though still outwardly calm, carried an undeniable edge. "Eleanor," she began, a sharp intake of breath preceding her words. "I know you mean well, but honestly, I just feel like you're not hearing us. We're doing things differently." She paused, letting her words sink in, then continued with an almost instructional tone. "I have a very clear vision for this wedding. And I just want everyone to stay in their lane so it all goes smoothly." Stay in their lane. The phrase, once delivered apologetically by Mike, now came from Ronnie as a direct, unequivocal command. It wasn't a request, it was an order. My heart sank, a heavy stone in my chest. The implication was clear. I was not to offer suggestions, not to provide advice, not to share my experience. I was truly, irrevocably, not part of this. My role was to be a silent, distant observer, nothing more. The pain was no longer just hurt, it was humiliation, stark and undeniable. A few weeks later, we were invited to Evelyn's house for another family dinner. Evelyn's home was a testament to modern minimalist all-cold steel, glass, and stark white walls. The air felt thin, devoid of the warmth of cherished memories. The conversation, predictably, turned to the wedding. They were discussing the lighting for the reception. "I think soft, amber uplighting would create a really romantic glow," I offered, drawing on my expertise, trying to contribute a relevant, helpful suggestion. Evelyn immediately cut me off, her voice crisp. "Oh, we're already working with someone, a very talented young designer, someone current. She understands the aesthetic Ronnie is going for." not the old-fashioned, heavy kind of lighting. My advice, once again, was dismissed, not just as irrelevant, but as inherently old-fashioned and heavy. The conversation then drifted to the wedding photos. Ronnie pulled out her phone, showing us images of beautifully staged, perfectly filtered pictures she liked. Mike, perhaps trying to lighten the mood or share a personal moment, pulled out a small, worn photo album. "Look, Ronnie," he said, opening it to a page filled with his baby pictures. "These are great, right? My mom took these." Ronnie barely glanced at them. She offered a small, dismissive laugh. "Oh, Mike, those are very real. Not filtered. Not as curated as what we're aiming for. We want a more aesthetic tone, you know? Something cohesive for social media." Her words were a direct attack on authenticity, on the raw, unfiltered memories that defined a person's history. My heart ached for Mike, for the innocence of his childhood being so casually undervalued. Later that evening, as we were leaving, Mike followed me outside, his shoulders slumped. "Mom, I'm really sorry about all this," he mumbled, looking down at his shoes. His apology felt weak, a perfunctory gesture devoid of genuine conviction. It only confirmed what I already suspected. He was torn, caught between Ronnie's demands and his love for me, but ultimately choosing to align with his future wife. "At what cost, Michael?" I asked softly, not expecting an answer, just letting the question hang in the crisp night air. "At what cost will you lose yourself and lose me?" In that moment, a profound realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I was invisible not because I was old or outdated, but because I represented something Ronnie actively sought to erase. I represented depth, history, substance. I represented a past that didn't fit her curated, aesthetic, social media, perfect future. My authentic connection to Mike, my genuine desire to contribute, was a threat to her carefully constructed image. And that, I understood, was something she could not tolerate. A cold resolve solidified inside me. I returned home, the house silent and empty. I walked directly to my study, opened my desk drawer, and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. It was my wedding fund notebook, filled with careful entries and calculations. For 20 years, I had been setting aside money, saving diligently for Michael's wedding, a substantial sum intended to give him the grand celebration he deserved. I flipped through the pages, seeing the culmination of decades of dreams and sacrifices. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my phone. This money, I realized, was no longer destined for their aesthetic tone. It was going somewhere else. The decision was made, cold and clear. The next morning, with a heavy heart but a firm resolve, I went to the bank. I quietly withdrew the vast majority of the wedding fund, the savings I had meticulously accumulated over 2 decades for Mike's special day. It was a significant amount, enough to cover a truly beautiful celebration. What I left behind was a symbolic, small amount, barely a fraction of the original sum. It was enough to be considered a contribution, but nowhere near what they expected. This wasn't about malice. It was about protecting myself, about honoring the boundary they had so vehemently drawn. Later that day, I wrote a brief, polite note. "Dear Mike and Ronnie," it read, "I wanted to offer a small contribution towards your wedding. I wish you both a future filled with happiness." I enclosed the check for the symbolic amount and mailed it. No explanations, no apologies, just the quiet action of a mother who had been told to stay in her lane and had finally, definitively, done so. A week passed in tense silence. Then, Mike appeared at my door unannounced, his face etched with a mix of tension and guilt. He wouldn't meet my eyes directly, his gaze darting around the living room as if looking for an escape. He looked uncomfortable, like a child caught in a lie. He finally sat down, took a deep breath, and blurted it out. "Mom." Ronnie saw the check. She thought. "Well, we both thought you were planning to cover more, like the full amount. We were expecting the wedding fund." His voice was low, laced with disappointment and a hint of accusation. I looked at him, my expression calm, almost serene. The pain was still there, a dull throb, but it was now overshadowed by a quiet strength. "Mike," I said, my voice even. I was asked to stay in my lane. So, I did. You and Ronnie made it very clear that my ideas, my experience, and my involvement weren't welcome. You wanted a modern, minimalist wedding, planned by a current social media expert. You both dismissed my contributions, called my suggestions dated, and repeatedly told me to step back. And you, my son, stood by and watched it happen. He shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, it's not like that. She just wants control. She gets overwhelmed easily, and she wants everything to be perfect. You know how she is with her vision." He was defending her, making excuses, just as I knew he would. I held his gaze. "Perfect doesn't mean excluding the people who love you, Mike. And overwhelmed isn't an excuse for disrespect, for making someone feel worthless. I spent 35 years making other people's perfect days come true. I wanted to do the same for you, but I was told my help was an intrusion, my experience obsolete." I paused, my voice hardening slightly. "You let it happen, Mike. You stood there and watched me be erased from one of the most important moments of your life. Every time I tried to offer something, you either stayed silent or made excuses for Ronnie's behavior." Mike winced, the guilt more apparent on his face now. He looked away again, then back at me, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Mom, there's something else. Ronnie, she signed a contract with Celeste Sterling, the social media planner, for $55,000. $55,000. My blood ran cold. Celeste Sterling. Eventology by L. My mind immediately went to the numerous red flags I had encountered during my career when dealing with flashy, unverified online planners. $55,000? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper, disbelief warring with a rising sense of dread. "Mike, did you vet this person? Did you check her references, her actual portfolio, beyond what's on social media? $55,000 is an exorbitant amount for someone without a proven track record. Are you sure she's legitimate? Are you sure you're not falling for some kind of scam?" My years of experience were screaming at me, but I forced myself to remain calm. How can you place such blind trust in someone you barely know, and yet completely dismiss your own mother's experience? Mike's confidence, which had been wavering, now completely cracked. He looked utterly defeated. "Ronnie said we had to move fast, Mom. The best vendors get booked up quickly. She's already committed to things. Deposits have been paid for the venue, the caterer Celeste recommended, and the flower designer." He spoke quickly, almost defensively, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his growing fear. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the man who now stood before me, caught in a web of his fiancée's making. A part of me, the protective mother, wanted to rush in, to save him from this potential disaster. But another, colder part, reminded me of the boundaries, the lane I had been so forcefully assigned. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had removed myself from the direct path of this collision course. I had stepped out of the way, but despite everything, despite the hurt and the anger, I didn't want to see them get hurt. I just didn't want to be the one to pick up the pieces. The days that followed Mike's visit were surprisingly peaceful for me. The initial anger and dread about his situation began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of freedom. I channeled my energy into my own life, focusing on hobbies I had neglected during my years of frantic wedding planning and recent attempts to connect with Mike and Ronnie. I took long walks in the park, enjoyed quiet mornings with a cup of coffee and a good book, and rediscovered the joy of simply existing without the pressure of trying to please or prove myself to anyone. The pretense that had permeated my interactions with Mike and Ronnie was gone. And with it, a heavy weight was lifted. My home felt lighter, my heart less burdened. Then, about a month later, the phone rang. It was Mike. His voice was hoarse and shaky, barely recognizable. The sound of it sent a jolt of concern through me, immediately pulling me back from my peaceful new routine. "Mom," he choked out. "It's Celeste. She's gone. She took the money. My heart sank. A grim validation settled over me, though it brought no satisfaction. What do you mean? She's gone, Mike. I asked, my voice as steady as I could make it. He explained, his words tumbling out in a rush of panic and despair. Celeste Sterling's website was down, her phone numbers disconnected. The email addresses bounced. She had vanished into thin air, taking their substantial deposit, including Ronnie's initial payments and the $55,000 for her services with her. We've been scammed, Mom, he whispered, the raw agony in his voice cutting through my resolve. What came next, however, was a fresh wave of hurt, sharper than the financial loss. Mike went on, his voice laced with bitterness. Ronnie? She's blaming me. Mom, she said I should have convinced you to pay for the wedding. She keeps saying this wouldn't have happened if we had just used your money, if you had just done what we expected. I listened in stunned silence. The audacity, the sheer nerve of it, was breathtaking. Not only were they not taking responsibility for their own choices, but they were now blaming me for not having been taken advantage of. My calm facade cracked slightly, a surge of righteous indignation bubbling to the surface. Mike, I said, my voice firm, this happened because you both acted like my money and my experience were guaranteed, something you were entitled to, even as you dismissed me and my boundaries. It happened because you put your trust in an unverified social media persona over a mother who literally made a career out of knowing reputable vendors. He quickly apologized, a torrent of "I'm sorry, Mom, and I know we messed up," spilling out. But the apologies felt hollow, born of desperation and the collapse of his plans, not genuine remorse or understanding. I know, Mom. I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have checked. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that apologies don't rebuild what arrogance destroys. They don't magically erase the disrespect or the feeling of being discarded. Over the next few weeks, I heard through the quiet grapevine of acquaintances that the wedding was off. It wasn't officially announced, but the whispers were undeniable. The engagement had crumbled under the immense pressure of financial loss, shattered dreams, and the heavy burden of blame and resentment that Ronnie had heaped upon Mike. There were stories of bitter arguments, accusations, and Ronnie packing her bags. I didn't gloat. There was no sense of triumph, only a quiet, melancholic observation. I had stayed in my lane, as they had so vehemently insisted, and from that lane, I watched everything they had tried to build, based on superficiality and exclusion, fall apart. It was a painful validation, a confirmation that sometimes, allowing people to learn their own lessons, no matter how harsh, is the only path. In the aftermath, as the dust settled on their broken plans, my own life continued to unfold, quietly, and with increasing fulfillment. I filled my days with the simple, authentic pleasures I had rediscovered. Walks in the park became a daily ritual, coffee dates with old friends, animated discussions at my new book club, and even small home projects like repainting a spare room or finally clearing out old cluttered closets brought a surprising amount of joy and satisfaction. Through it all, a profound realization dawned on me. For years, I had unconsciously molded myself to others' expectations. As a dutiful wife, a supportive mother, a successful wedding planner always striving for perfection. But now, free from the need to conform, free from the constant striving for acceptance from Mike and Ronnie, I began to see myself anew. I was just Eleanor. And that, I realized, was enough. More than enough. It was liberating. This newfound freedom sparked a quiet revolution within me. I started accepting invitations I would have once declined, joined new social groups, and ventured into activities I had always wanted to try. With each step, each new connection, I felt a piece of myself returning. I began to remember who I was, not in relation to anyone else, but purely as myself. A woman with her own worth, her own voice, and her own lane. And this lane, I realized, was far more beautiful and fulfilling than anything they could have ever offered. Even with the quiet hum of my new life, Mike was still my son. I didn't erase him from my life. That wasn't in me, but I stopped holding my breath, stopped waiting for him to come back, to truly see me. I sent him occasional texts, simple check-ins, but I didn't push. I understood that his journey, his lessons, were his to learn. My job as a mother, I realized, had shifted. It was no longer about guiding his every step, but about being a steady, albeit distant, presence. One sunny afternoon, I ran into an old friend from my wedding planning days at the local market. After exchanging pleasantries, she leaned in conspiratorially. "Ellie, have you heard about Celeste Sterling?" she whispered, her eyes wide. "She's been officially exposed as a multi-client fraud. It's all over the industry forums. Apparently, she took deposits from dozens of couples and vanished. A real ghost. Completely untraceable." Later that evening, the news reports confirmed it. My stomach churned as I watched the local segment, seeing Mike and Ronnie's names, among others, listed as victims in the scam. While I felt a pang of maternal concern for Mike, a part of me couldn't help but acknowledge the bitter truth. Their misfortune was also a direct consequence of their own hubris, their dismissal of seasoned advice, and their blind faith in an unverified online persona. They had wanted the aesthetic, the trend, the perfectly curated image, and they had paid a steep price for it. The reports also mentioned the devastating impact the fraud had on many relationships. Ronnie, I heard through the grapevine, continued to blame everyone but herself. She blamed Mike for not securing my money, for not being a better judge of character. She blamed me for not stepping up. The engagement, as I had predicted, completely collapsed under the weight of recrimination and resentment. Ronnie moved back in with Evelyn, her mother, leaving Mike alone in the apartment they had once planned to share as husband and wife. I knew Mike would eventually call. It wasn't a question of if, but when. You don't lose everything, your fiancé, your savings, your future plans, and not eventually look back to what was real, what was constant. And I was real. My love for him, my presence in his life, my genuine concern, despite everything, was real. I had been there. Always. He would eventually remember that. In the meantime, I continued to cultivate my new life, a life built on dignity over drama. I started volunteering at the local library, helping organize community events. I even dabbled in creative writing, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. My days were filled with purposeful activities, genuine connections, and the quiet satisfaction of self-discovery. There was no room for bitterness, no time for dwelling on the past. My energy was focused on building a fulfilling present and a hopeful future. For myself. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, my mind would drift back to that Sunday afternoon when Mike had first announced his engagement. The memory was tinged with a deep, almost nostalgic sadness. I remembered my blind hope, the rush of joy, the naive belief that his happiness would be my happiness. I remembered my earnest attempts to warn him, to offer my help, only to be met with dismissal and the stinging command to stay in my lane. The sadness I felt wasn't for the lost wedding, or for the grand celebration that never was. It was for Mike's lost illusion, for his desperate chasing of approval, for his inability to see past the superficiality that Ronnie embodied. It was a sadness for the path he had chosen, a path that led to such painful lessons. Through it all, I learned a crucial lesson, one that resonated deeply within my soul. You can't teach people to value you. They have to choose to. No matter how much love you give, no matter how much expertise you offer, if they don't see your worth, if they don't choose to appreciate your presence, your efforts are in vain. My worth was inherent, not dependent on their validation or inclusion. One blustery autumn day, I was sitting on a park bench, watching a young child in a bright yellow coat try, repeatedly, to fly a kite. The wind would catch it, lift it for a moment, and then it would tumble back to earth. The child kept trying, each time with renewed hope. I thought about my own life, about the times I had relied on others to lift me, to define me. Watching that child, I realized I no longer needed someone else to lift my kite. I knew how to harness my own wind, to find my own currents, and to soar on my own. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, a quiet cold settled over me. And in that quiet cold, I made a conscious choice. I forgave Michael. Not for him, but for myself. Not because he had earned it, but because I needed the peace that only forgiveness could bring. It was a liberation, a final release from the lingering threads of hurt and resentment. I was free. The months continued to turn, bringing with them a crisp autumn and then the quiet hush of winter. My new life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, a self-sufficient melody. Then, one Saturday morning, as I was tending to my window box full of hardy winter flowers, I looked up and saw him. Michael stood at my front gate, looking different. He was thinner, perhaps, and definitely looked older than the last time I'd really looked at him. There was a tiredness in his eyes, but also something else. Something grounded there. Something real that hadn't been present before. My heart gave a little stutter. It had been nearly a year since our last meaningful conversation. Since the raw, painful confrontation about the wedding fund and Celeste Sterling. Hearing him say, "Hi, Mom," again, soft and hesitant, brought a rush of emotion I hadn't expected. It wasn't the boisterous greeting of my youth, but a gentle re-entry. "Michael," I said, my voice equally soft. I opened the gate and welcomed him inside. The warmth of my home, a stark contrast to the quiet chill outside. We sat in the kitchen, and I made him a simple lunch. We talked at first about mundane things. My garden, his work, the weather. The conversation unfolded slowly, cautiously, like two people carefully recharting a familiar landscape after a long absence. There were no immediate apologies or dramatic confessions. It was a gentle unfolding, a slow reconnection that felt more genuine than any forced interaction. Eventually, as we finished our coffee, he took a deep breath. "Mom," he began, looking at me directly for the first time with a clear, steady gaze. "There's someone new. Her name's Clara." A tiny, almost imperceptible shift happened within me. My maternal instincts, long suppressed, stirred. "Oh?" I prompted, keeping my tone neutral, unwilling to rush or impose. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes, a smile I hadn't seen in a very long time. "She's different. So different from Ronnie. She's soft, kind. She asks questions. And she actually listens, Mom, truly listens." The way he described her, not with grand declarations or superficial praise, but with observations about her character, spoke volumes. Then, he said something that truly resonated, something that made a quiet hope begin to stir within me. "The other day, we were talking, and she asked about you. Not about the wedding drama, not about the past, but about you. She said she wanted to meet the woman who raised me, the woman who taught me right from wrong. It wasn't about my past as a planner, or my money. It was about my role as his mother, as a person." This was a profound difference. I felt a cautious, quiet hope bloom in my chest, fragile but real. It wasn't the blinding, naive hope of before, but a mature, grounded expectation. This felt different. This felt sincere. Michael continued, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. "Clara isn't trying to prove anything, Mom. She doesn't care about social media aesthetics or what's trending. She just wants to build something good, something real, with me." He then pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of Clara. She wasn't strikingly beautiful in a conventional, polished way, but her face radiated a genuine warmth, a gentle strength. There was no sparkle or flair or forced fashion in the picture, just an authentic, approachable kindness. He put the phone down, looking at me with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. "And, Mom," he said, his voice a little softer, "Clara wants you to plan our wedding. She said it would be an honor, that your experience, your guidance, would mean everything to her. To us." My breath hitched. The words were simple, yet they held so much weight. This wasn't a demand, not an expectation born of entitlement. This was a genuine invitation, extended with respect and appreciation. It felt like a gentle hand reaching out, not to take, but to include. My heart, once hardened, now softened, filled with a warmth that spread through my entire being. "I'd like that, Michael," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'd really like that." This time, I knew I was genuinely invited, not just expected or taken for granted. Later that evening, after Michael had left, I found myself sitting at my desk. A new, blank notebook open before me. This wouldn't be a notebook for floor plans, color palettes, or vendor lists. This would be a notebook for feelings. I picked up my pen and, on the first page, slowly wrote down the words that came to mind. Joy, honesty, gentleness, gratitude. This wedding, I realized, would be about so much more than just a celebration. It would be about building a new foundation, not just for them, but for us. The wedding planning with Clara was nothing short of a revelation. Weekends were filled not with stress, but with quiet joy. We would sit together, sometimes at my kitchen table, sometimes at a cozy cafe, poring over ideas, not chasing trends, but discussing what truly resonated with them. Clara listened to my suggestions with genuine interest, often expanding on them, making them even better. I felt truly seen, my experience valued, my creativity respected. We weren't just executing a plan, we were sharing a vision, building something beautiful together. I realized this was more than just a job, more than just helping my son. This was a moment for me to contribute to my own happiness, to rediscover the passion that had once been dimmed by disrespect. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone, but about engaging in something meaningful that brought me genuine satisfaction. They chose an intimate garden venue, tucked away behind a quaint historic inn. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it radiated charm and a personal significance that spoke volumes. The focus was on thoughtful details, handmade invitations, locally sourced flowers, a menu featuring their favorite comfort foods. It was simple, yes, but it was profoundly theirs, reflecting their quiet, authentic love. There was no pressure for it to be social media perfect, just heart perfect. Throughout the planning, Clara's gratitude was constant and heartfelt. "You're so good at this, Eleanor," she would often say, her eyes shining with sincerity. "You've made all of this so much easier, so much more real than I ever imagined. It feels like us." Her words were a balm to my soul, healing the old wounds. I felt truly seen for what I truly was. Someone who knew how to craft memories, not just events. The wedding day arrived, bathed in soft, golden autumn light. Everything was perfect, not in the flawless, artificial sense, but in its genuine beauty and warmth. Michael moved with a quiet appreciation, his eyes frequently meeting mine, a silent acknowledgement of all that had transpired. He looked genuinely happy, grounded, at peace. As Clara walked down the aisle, her simple, elegant dress flowing behind her, her face alight with pure joy, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Her vows were honest, deeply personal, devoid of pretense. Watching them, two people ready to truly commit, ready to get it right this time, I realized something profound. I had already forgiven Michael, not just in my mind, but in my heart. I had healed. I could finally let go of the past for good. The reception was everything a celebration should be, filled with genuine laughter, heartfelt conversations, and the warmth of real love. There was no spectacle, no grand display, just the authentic joy of family and friends celebrating a true connection. Later, as the music played softly, Michael found me. He pulled me into a tight embrace, holding me for a long moment. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with emotion. This was everything. Truly. His words, simple and direct, were all I had ever truly needed to hear. Then Clara joined us, her eyes sparkling. She took my hand. "You were the heart of this, Eleanor," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I can't imagine what this day would have been without you." Her gaze held such genuine appreciation that it filled me with a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. I watched them dance, a new, true love blossoming before my eyes. In that moment, I knew I had found my way back to love, not just as a mother, but as Eleanor. A woman who had rediscovered her own worth. And that, I knew, was enough. A month after the wedding, Michael called, his voice light and happy. He relayed something Clara had said to him. "Clara told me something about you, Mom," he began. "She said you're the heart of everything. Not just the wedding, but the way you are. The way you make people feel something real." A knowing smile touched my lips. I told him gently. I needed my creations to be mine to create. Not something expected, not something demanded. I needed to be valued for what I brought, not just for what I could provide. Michael paused, then offered a simple apology. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see that, Mom." It was quiet, heartfelt, and utterly sincere. And that, I realized, was enough. It was more than enough. Sitting on my porch a few weeks later, the crisp autumn air a comforting presence, I reflected on my journey. I had been told to stay in my lane. I had been dismissed, disrespected, and made to feel invisible. But through it all, I had found my own path, a path of self-worth and quiet strength. When Clara came to visit, bringing me a small bouquet of wildflowers, she sat beside me, reiterating her thanks, her genuine appreciation, a warm blanket around my heart. In that moment, truly seen, truly valued, I knew this moment. This quiet, authentic connection was the one I had been waiting for all along. This was my true north.